Download sequence.
Today, we're diving into some of the most ambitious RPGs ever made. Games that let you experience conflict from multiple perspectives, shifting narratives, and morally grey decisions that hit way harder once you see the bigger picture. If you love JRPGs that challenge your perspective, that make you question who's right, who's wrong, and what victory even means, then this list is for you.
Forced to enter a battle of attrition.
History is often written by the victors, but Odin Sphere forces you to read the diaries of the losers too. The game is set during a world-ending war known as Armageddon, fought between the demon nation of Ragnarval and the fairy kingdom of Ringford. You don't pick a side, instead you play 5 unique characters, each from a different faction, experiencing the exact same events from 5 conflicting angles. For example, in one chapter, you play the Valkyrie Gwendolen of Ragnarval, who sees the fairy queen Mercedes as a villain obstructing her kingdom's glory. But when you switch to Mercedes' story, you see Gwendolen's father as a vicious tyrant who murdered her mother. Every character is driven by love, revenge, or duty, and every death you caused in one story is mourned in the next. The game meticulously builds empathy for every side, making it clear that this war wasn't about good versus evil, it was just a heartbreaking tragedy. In Breath of Fire 4, the narrative is split to make you sympathize with both sides of an inevitable conflict. You don't just play the hero, you play the final boss. For the majority of the game, you control Ryu, a kind, silent protagonist who is actually a reborn dragon. His journey is a classic adventure filled with friends, vibrant locals, and the quest to save the world. But then, the game abruptly switches focus entirely. You become Fu Lu, the immortal god emperor and Ryu's other half. Fu Lu is cold, immensely powerful, and utterly betrayed by the humans he created and ruled. His dedicated sections detail his slow, brutal march to reclaim his throne, while the Empire constantly hunts and assaults him. You are forced to witness the depths of human cruelty through his eyes, which justifies his ultimate goal to wipe them out. By experiencing both perspectives, the hopeful wanderer and the bitter, betrayed deity, the final confrontation between the two dragons becomes one of the most morally complex decisions in JRPG history. Tactics Ogre is the ultimate political branching route JRPG. Early on, the game gives you a brutal choice: obey orders and participate in a massacre, or reject your superiors and become a hunted criminal. That one decision splits the entire game into 3 major routes: law, chaos, and neutral. Each route leads you into different alliances, enemy factions, and moral dilemmas. Characters who die in one route become allies in another. Former enemies reveal sympathetic backstories when you join them, and leaders who seemed righteous on one path reveal their corruption on another. The war is told through propaganda, class tension, ethnic cleansing, and power struggles. It's a story where every side thinks they're fighting for justice. By the end, the moral lines blur so hard that you question whether the route you chose is any better than the others. Playing all the routes gives you the complete picture, and that's what makes Tactics Ogre legendary.
Now, the goddess watches over Fodlan, from her kingdom above, as the mother of all life, the arbiter of every soul.
Fire Emblem Three Houses is practically built for exploring every side of a massive continental war. You play as a teacher, guiding students from one of 3 houses, but halfway through the game, your students become the generals and political leaders of their nations, and you find yourself locked into their worldview. If you choose the Black Eagles, you side with Edelgard and her revolutionary vision, waging war against the church. Pick the Blue Lions, and you follow Dimitri down a path of vengeance and psychological trauma. Choose the Golden Deer, and you end up uncovering the hidden truths behind the entire civilization. And siding with the church gives yet another take on the conflict. Each route reveals different villains, different truths, and completely different motivations behind the war. Characters you love in one route become enemies in another, and the emotional gut punch is real because you spend hours bonding with them. Three Houses is one story told four ways, and you only understand the true picture after seeing all sides.
He does not know your potential.
Live Alive is a storytelling experiment that perfectly captures seeing conflict from different sides. Each chapter is basically a self-contained JRPG with its own protagonist, time period, gameplay style, and moral struggles. You play as a ninja infiltrating a castle, a cowboy hunted by outlaws, a wrestler fighting for honor, a distant future robot uncovering betrayal, and more. When the stories converge, the game reveals that each character is a piece of a much bigger conflict, and the final twist lets you choose one of the protagonists to become the villain, suggesting that anyone can become the antagonist from someone else's point of view. The game's structure itself is a metaphor. Every chapter is a perspective, and only when you see them all do you understand the real story. How much can one choice change a war? In Front Mission 3, a single decision in the first hour changes the entire course of the game, splitting the story into two completely separate 60-hour narratives. You play as the mechanic Kazuki Takamura, who is suddenly thrust into a geopolitical conflict between the OCU and the USN. If you choose to help Emma, you join the USN military. You spend the entire campaign uncovering a massive conspiracy involving genetic experiments, fighting against the military forces of the DHZ. But if you choose to follow your friend Elisa, you immediately defect to the other side. The rebels you fought in the first playthrough are now your trusted allies. The heroes of the USN are now the corrupt villains you must destroy. Because both paths are mutually exclusive, you can't say you understand the true nature of the conflict until you have played through both routes and betrayed your own previous save file. Final Fantasy Type 0 is one of the darkest portrayals of war in the franchise. You play as Class 0, elite teenage soldiers who witness every horror of war firsthand. Although you technically represent one nation, the game constantly shifts your perspective through propaganda broadcasts, enemy cutscenes, and missions, revealing the moral compromises your own country makes. Type 0's nations are locked in a cycle of death and reincarnation, which adds tragedy to every battle. Soldiers forget past lives, commit atrocities, die, revive, and repeat without understanding the larger forces controlling them. You see both the cruelty and the desperation of each faction. The multiple endings reveal the consequences of different wartime decisions, and the game's emotional ending drives home the futility of conflict. Type 0 doesn't beautify war, it exposes it. Triangle Strategy is a masterclass in political storytelling. You play Serenoa, but you're not the sole decision maker. Your companions vote on major choices, meaning you don't always get the route you want. And that's what makes the war so compelling. The continent is split between three nations with long histories, clashing cultures, and deep wounds. Every route you choose plunges you into a different philosophy: loyalty, liberation, or moral revolution. In one path, you defend your homeland but adopt increasingly brutal tactics. In another, you betray allies to prevent a worldwide catastrophe. And in one of the most dramatic routes, you overthrow the system entirely and create a brand new world order. The game shines because every faction, even the villains, has understandable motives. There are no purely evil characters, just people shaped by history, trauma, and survival. The multiple campaigns let you experience the war from fully different political angles. One route reveals atrocities your enemies committed. Another reveals the ones your allies committed. Only by playing all sides do you understand the full truth of the conflict. Triangle Strategy is the closest modern JRPG to a playable political drama. Valkyria Chronicles tells the story of a small militia squad thrown into a massive continental war. But what makes it perfect for this theme is how it humanizes both sides of the conflict. You play as Squad 7 of the Gallian Militia, a group of citizens pushed into war when their homeland is invaded by the Imperial Alliance. Through Welkin, Alicia, and the rest of the squad, you see the hope, fear, and unity of a small nation fighting for survival. But the deeper you get into the story, the more the game pulls back the curtain on the Imperials. You meet enemy commanders with tragic pasts, soldiers forced into service, and leaders whose motivations are far more complex than the enemy. Some of the most emotional missions in the game come from seeing the war from the Imperials' perspective, especially in the DLC, where you actually control their side in full story chapters. Suddenly, characters who were once villains become sympathetic. Their goals, their losses, and their sacrifices hit just as hard as those of your own squad. Valkyria Chronicles doesn't just show you two sides of a war, it makes you care about both. And it does it while blending tactical combat, watercolor visuals, and some of the best character writing in any wartime JRPG. Suikoden 3 is one of the strongest examples of a JRPG that lets you truly experience multiple sides of a war, not just in small scenes, but through full story campaigns. The game's signature Trinity sight system lets you follow three protagonists, each fighting for what they believe is right, and each giving you a completely different understanding of the same conflict. You start with Hugo, the young warrior from the grasslands. Through him, you see the fear, the confusion, and the political manipulation tearing tribal life apart. What looks like rebellion from the outside is, from Hugo's eyes, the desperate struggle to survive. Then you switch to Chris Lightfellow, the Silver Maiden of the Zexan Knights. To her, the Grasslanders are aggressors, unpredictable, and dangerous. Her chapters flip the story. You see discipline, grief, and the burden of maintaining order as tensions escalate. And finally, Gedo, the mercenary captain. His perspective reveals secrets neither side understands. Where Hugo sees community and Chris sees duty, Gedo sees the truth in the shadows. Ancient forces pushing both nations toward war. Playing these three stories in parallel completely changes your understanding of the world. Characters you once thought were villains now feel sympathetic. Actions that seemed hostile turn out to be misunderstandings. And when the three protagonists finally converge, the full picture of the war finally snaps into place. Suikoden 3 isn't just a JRPG with multiple viewpoints, it's a game about how perspective shapes truth and why no war is ever as simple as heroes versus villains. It's one of the best narrative designs ever created for showing both sides of a conflict in a single, unified story. Final Fantasy Tactics is the definition of a war told from every angle, and one of the darkest political stories Square has ever written. You play as Ramza Beowulf, a noble who becomes disillusioned with the class system, church corruption, and even his own family as Ivalice spirals into civil war. But the brilliance of FFT is how it constantly forces you to see the conflict from both sides. To the nobles, Ramza is a traitor. To the commoners, he's a saviour. To the church, he's a threat that must disappear. And then there's Delita, Ramza's childhood friend. Delita rises through the ranks of the nobility by playing the political game from the inside, experiencing the war through manipulation and deception. Every chapter shifts your understanding of who's really fighting who and why. Ramza fights the war from the shadows, while Delita becomes the hero of the people, but at a price. The game isn't just about battles, it's about how history is written by those who survive it. Two friends take two completely different paths through the same war, and only by seeing both perspectives do you understand the truth behind Ivalice's greatest conflict. This is one of the most mature two sides of a war JRPGs ever made. Radiant Historia is one of the smartest JRPGs ever made about seeing a war from both sides. You play Stock, an intelligence agent suddenly given the White Chronicle, a mysterious book that lets him jump between two branching timelines. These timelines aren't just alternate realities, they're the two major political paths in the same continental war. In one timeline, you serve a kingdom struggling for survival. In the other, you align with a nation trying to seize power before their resources collapse. What makes Radiant Historia brilliant is how every decision ripples across timelines. A failed diplomatic mission in one route can doom the other. A character who dies in one timeline might provide crucial help in another, if you save them earlier. It creates this incredible cross-timeline puzzle where understanding both sides of the war is the only way to prevent a catastrophe that destroys the entire continent. The game is also filled with surprising emotional choices. You uncover betrayal, politics, desperate alliances, and tragic future timelines you can only fix by jumping back to the other side. By the end, Radiant Historia becomes less about who is right and more about how incomplete a story is when you only hear it from one perspective. This is the definitive JRPG about seeing every angle of a conflict. Suikoden 2 remains one of the greatest war JRPGs ever created. It tells the story of two nations once united as friends, now driven into conflict by tragedy, corruption, and one of the most chilling villains in JRPG history, Luca Blight. You play as a young soldier who witnesses betrayal from both sides and eventually becomes the leader of a rebellion. But what makes the game so powerful is how deeply it humanizes the enemy. Through its massive cast of 108 characters, you recruit soldiers, civilians, nobles, and refugees, many from the opposing army. Their personal stories expose everything from political brainwashing to the horrors of occupation. Replay the game and you'll see characters you once fought offering totally new perspectives when you recruit them early. NPCs become party members, enemies become friends, traitors become heroes. Suikoden 2 isn't just about seeing both sides, it's about realizing everyone is suffering. The war is ugly, emotional, and morally complex in a way few JRPGs dared to portray. It's a masterpiece because it never lets you forget. In war, no one escapes untouched. Xenogears is a JRPG where war dominates every part of life, and what makes it fit this theme so well is how it constantly shifts your perspective between nations, religions, and even ancient civilizations, all fighting for control. The story begins with Faye, a villager thrown into a conflict between Ava and Kislev, two nations locked in a long, bitter war. But as you progress, Xenogears slowly reveals the layers behind the conflict. You're not just seeing one nation's side, you're experiencing the agendas of governments, underground factions, rogue military units, and even entire societies hidden from the world. Each chapter gives you a new perspective through characters like Bart, Ellie, and Saiten, who represent completely different political and ideological backgrounds. And then the game shifts again, revealing that the war between nations is just a surface-level struggle masking something far larger, an ancient conflict spanning thousands of years. Suddenly, the enemy isn't a nation, but a system, and characters you once thought were antagonists become allies once the truth comes out. Xenogears shows both sides of the war, then shows the side behind the war, and then reveals the conflict beneath that. It's one of the most ambitious multi-perspective narratives ever put into a JRPG.
That concludes our episode for the day. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive a notification about the latest game deals and updates. Thank you for tuning in. See you in the next video.